The cathedral bells had just begun to ring when Darcy Tyndall realized something was wrong. Not with the flowers. The flowers were perfect. Cascading arrangements of white foxglove and deep blue larkspur lining every pew, exactly as she had specified in the brief she'd written 6 weeks ago, not with the candles. 300 hand-dipped tapers in iron candelabras, lit in sequence from the altar outward so the light would ripple like a wave when the doors opened. Not with the music, or the seating, or the placement of the ceremonial banners that hung from the vaulted ceiling in alternating panels of midnight and gold. The flowers were perfect. The candles were perfect. Everything Darcy had spent 6 weeks building was exactly where it was supposed to be. The problem was the groom. He was standing at the altar in a fitted black coat with a high collar, his dark golden-brown hair pushed back from his forehead, his hands clasped behind his back, and he was not looking at the doors where his bride would enter. He was looking at Darcy. She was standing near the east transept with her planning folio pressed against her chest and a quill tucked behind her ear, half hidden behind a stone column, where she could see the full cathedral without being seen herself. That was the job. Be everywhere. Be invisible. Make certain that when Alpha King Cormac Havelock of the Northern Reaches married Lady Elspeth Vane in front of 400 witnesses, every single moment unfolded exactly as planned. Darcy had done this dozens of times. She was the best wedding planner in the Eastern Territories, and she had built that reputation by being precise, unflappable, and utterly forgettable. The bride should shine. The groom should look moved. The planner should not exist. But Cormac Havelock was looking at her. His storm blue eyes found hers across the crowded nave, steady and deliberate, and Darcy felt the warmth bloom in her chest again. That strange, inexplicable heat that had started 6 weeks ago and had not stopped since. She looked away, checked her folio, counted the candles on the south side for the fourth time. He was still looking. 6 weeks earlier. The commission had arrived by courier on a Tuesday morning, sealed with dark blue wax and stamped with the sigil of the Northern Reaches. Darcy had opened it at her desk in the cramped office above the florist's shop on Briar Lane, read it twice, and then set it down very carefully as if it might burst into flame. Alpha King Cormac Havelock requested the services of Darcy Tyndall for the coordination of his upcoming bonding ceremony to Lady Elspeth Vane of the Western Province. The ceremony would take place at Ashenmere Cathedral. The budget was, in the words of the letter, not a concern. She'd said yes. Of course she'd said yes. This was the kind of commission that came once in a career. The kind that would keep her business solvent for the next 5 years and put her name on the lips of every noble house in the realm. She'd told herself that was the only reason her hands were shaking when she packed her trunk. The first meeting was in the cathedral itself. Darcy had arrived 2 hours early to walk the space, measuring sight lines and testing the acoustics and making notes about where the afternoon light fell through the high, stained glass windows. She was standing on the altar steps, holding her measuring cord at arm's length and squinting at the distance between the first pew and the ceremonial arch, when a voice behind her said, "You're the planner." She turned. And there he was, tall, broader through the shoulders than she had expected. His dark golden brown hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd ridden hard to get here, and his storm blue eyes were watching her with an expression she couldn't read. He wore a simple long-sleeved tunic of charcoal linen, no crown, no insignia, and his boots were dusty from the road. He looked like a man who had come straight from somewhere real, not a man preparing to perform. "Darcy Tyndall," she said, and dropped into a curtsy that was professional, practiced, and exactly the right depth for a king she was being paid to serve. "Your Majesty, I wasn't expecting you until the afternoon briefing. I came early." He climbed the altar steps, and as he passed her, the warmth hit. A flush of heat that started in her chest and radiated outward, as if she'd stepped too close to a bonfire. The cathedral was cool, almost cold, thick stone walls and high ceilings that held the chill even in summer. There was no reason for the heat. She blamed the candles. Even though none of them were lit, I wanted to see the space without the politics, he said. He was looking up at the vaulted ceiling, his hands in his pockets, and something in his posture was too quiet, too still. Not the bearing of a man counting down to the best day of his life. You've already started. Measurements. She held up her cord. The processional aisle is 3 feet narrower than standard, which means either the bride's train needs to be adjusted, or I need to move the front pews back by 18 inches. I'd recommend the pews. He looked at her, really looked at her, his storm blue eyes intent, and the corner of his mouth shifted. Not quite a smile. Something closer to recognition. You're very good at this. I'm being paid to be good at this. That's not the same thing. He turned back to the ceiling. The commission said you've never had a complaint. The commission said a lot of things, Your Majesty. Most of them were designed to make you sign the contract. He almost smiled. Almost. Cormac. I'm sorry? If we're going to spend 6 weeks together, you should call me Cormac. Your Majesty is going to slow the planning meetings down considerably. She should have said no. She should have maintained the professional boundary that had kept her sane through 100 commissions, through demanding brides and indifferent grooms and families that treated her like furniture. But the way he said it, casually, as if it cost him nothing, as if she was someone whose comfort mattered, made her throat tighten in a way she did not have time to examine. Cormac, she said. Just once. Testing it. The warmth flared again. Stronger. The weeks that followed were the most professionally rigorous of Darcy's career, and also the most quietly devastating. She was good at her job. She was exceptional at her job. She could source rare flowers from 3 provinces in under a week, negotiate with temperamental cathedral stewards, redesign an entire seating chart when a territorial dispute made it impossible to place House Aldrin within eyeline of House Brackett, and do it all without raising her voice or breaking a sweat. What she could not do was stop noticing Cormac Havelock. He attended every planning meeting, every single one. In her experience, grooms attended the first meeting and the final tasting and nothing in between, and even that was generous. Cormac sat through discussions of tablecloth weights and candle wax composition and the exact shade of blue for the ceremonial banners. Midnight, not navy, a distinction Darcy had assumed only she cared about, until he'd held 2 fabric swatches up to the window and said, "This one. It matches the sky an hour after sunset." He was right. It did. He asked questions. Not performative questions designed to show interest, but genuine, specific questions about why she'd chosen foxglove over roses, why the musicians should be in the gallery rather than the apse, why the vows should be spoken facing west instead of east. And when she answered, he listened. Not politely, not patiently. He listened the way someone listens when the answer actually matters to them. It was, she realized, the most dangerous thing anyone had ever done to her. The 4th week was the worst, the tasting for the reception feast, held in the palace kitchens on a rainy afternoon. Darcy had arranged 12 courses on a long oak table, each plated on samples of the ceremonial china, and Cormac had tasted every single one and given thoughtful, detailed feedback on each. When they reached the final course, a honey cake with cardamom cream, he'd held a forkful out to her. "You haven't eaten anything," he said. "You've been standing there with your folio the entire time." "I'm working." "You've been working for 9 hours. Eat." She should not have taken the fork from his hand. But she did. And when their fingers brushed, the warmth hit so hard she nearly dropped it. Cardamom and honey on her tongue, and his storm blue eyes watching her taste the thing he'd chosen, and the rain drumming on the windows, and the absurd, devastating intimacy of sharing food with a man who was not hers and could never be hers. She excused herself to check on the wine delivery. She stood in the cellar hallway and pressed her forehead to the cool stone wall and counted to 50. Because Darcy Tyndall had built her entire life around being useful, around being competent and reliable and invisible, the woman behind the curtain who made beautiful things happen for other people, and then went home to her empty flat above the florist's shop and ate bread and cheese alone by lamplight. She had never minded that. She had chosen it. The work was enough, but Cormac listened to her as if her words had weight, as if she was not the planner, not the hired professional, not the woman who was supposed to disappear once the ceremony was done, but a person, a specific, particular person whom he wanted to hear. And every time he stood close to her, the warmth came, spreading through her ribcage, pooling in her hands, settling at the base of her throat like a held breath. She blamed the kitchens, the afternoon sun through the preparation room windows, the fire in the hearth of the private chapel where they held their late meetings. She blamed everything except what it actually was, because naming it would mean admitting that she was falling in love with a man who was paying her to plan his wedding to someone else. The night before the rehearsal, 3 weeks in, she was alone in the chapel garden making final notes on the outdoor reception layout when he found her. The sun had set an hour ago, and the garden was lit by iron lanterns hung from the trellis arches. The air smelled of night jasmine and warm stone. "You work too late," he said from the garden gate. She didn't look up. "The reception tables need to be reconfigured. Lady Aldrin's party has grown by 8, and if I don't adjust the spacing, the servers won't be able to circulate." He walked toward her. The lantern light caught the angles of his face, the strong line of his jaw, the way his brow was furrowed as if something was troubling him that had nothing to do with seating charts. Darcy. The way he said her name made her pencil stop moving. She looked up. He was standing 3 feet away, his hands at his sides, and his storm blue eyes were the color of deep water in lamplight. The warmth bloomed so intensely she could feel it in her fingertips. "You should go inside," she said quietly. "The rehearsal is early tomorrow." "Why do you do that?" "Do what?" "Deflect. Every time I come close, you redirect. You find a task, a detail, something that needs your attention. You've done it 14 times in 3 weeks. I've counted." Her heart was hammering. "I redirect because you are the groom, and I am the wedding planner, and in 4 days you are marrying Lady Elspeth in front of 400 people, and it is my job to make sure that goes perfectly." He was quiet for a long moment. The lantern swung gently. Somewhere in the garden, a nightbird called. "What if I told you," he said carefully, "that Lady Elspeth and I have had a conversation?" "About the ceremony?" "About the fact that I have not once, in 6 months of correspondence and 3 formal meetings, felt anything for her except respect." Pauses. "And about the fact that every time I walk into a room where you are standing, the entire world gets warm." Darcy's breath caught. The folio in her hands trembled. She tightened her grip until the leather creaked. "That's..." She swallowed. "That's the cathedral. The candles. It's an enclosed space. The heat rises. It happens outside too. It happened just now when I walked through that gate." Cormac. Every planning meeting, every tasting, every late night in the chapel when you were reviewing the order of ceremony, and I was supposedly reviewing territorial correspondence, but actually just watching the way your mouth moves when you're counting under your breath. His voice was low, rough at the edges. "It's not the candles, Darcy." She closed her folio, set it on the stone bench. Her hands were shaking, and she pressed them flat against her skirt to stop it. I am the wedding planner," she said, "not the bride. I know exactly who you are. Then you know I can't. We can't." Voice breaks. You have a political marriage arranged. Your council negotiated the terms. Lady Elspeth's family has invested in this alliance. I am not the kind of woman who— Elspeth knows. He stepped closer. One step. The warmth intensified, spreading from her chest down through her stomach and into her hands, and she could see it in his face too, the way his breath deepened, the way his pupils widened in the lantern light. I told her 2 weeks ago. She was relieved, actually. She said she'd suspected since the second planning meeting, when I argued with you about tablecloth weights for 20 minutes. Laughed softly. Despite everything, despite the terror and the trembling, Darcy almost laughed. You were wrong about the tablecloths. I know I was. I didn't care about the tablecloths. I wanted you to keep talking. She looked at him. Really looked at him, the way she had not allowed herself to look at him for 3 weeks. The strong, open face. The storm blue eyes that held hers with an intensity that was almost unbearable. The slight part of his lips, as if he was holding himself still through an act of will. The ceremony, she whispered. Your council, the 400 guests who are already traveling. I've handled the council. Elspeth has spoken with her family. The ceremony will still happen on the scheduled date. In the cathedral you've made more beautiful than I thought possible. He held her gaze. But I will not be marrying Elspeth. Her pulse was roaring in her ears. Then what was the point of all this? I didn't plan this, Darcy. I hired a wedding planner and she turned out to be— He stopped. His jaw tightened, and she watched him wrestle with something, some final restraint. She turned out to be the woman I am supposed to spend my life with. And I know that because every time you touch my hand to adjust a cufflink or show me a fabric sample, the rest of the world goes quiet and all I can feel is warmth. She didn't kiss him that night. She went back to her room and sat on the edge of her bed and pressed her hands to her face and breathed. She didn't sleep. In the morning, she found a note slipped under her door in a hand she had come to know as well as her own. The ceremony proceeds as planned. I will not ask you for anything you don't freely give, but I will be honest with you, Darcy, even if honesty is the most terrifying thing I've ever done. See. She read it 3 times, then she folded it carefully and tucked it into the leather pocket of her planning folio, between the final seating chart and the order of ceremony. The remaining days passed in a blur of last preparations. Darcy threw herself into the work with a ferocity that bordered on obsessive, adjusting flower placements by 1/4 inches, rewriting the musician's cue sheet twice, personally inspecting every candle for even burn height. If her assistants noticed that she flinched every time the king entered a room, they didn't comment on it. If they noticed that the king's gaze followed her whenever she moved, they kept that to themselves too. Cormac kept his word. He didn't press. He didn't corner her, or send more notes or manufacture reasons to be alone with her. He attended the final meetings with the same quiet attentiveness he'd shown from the beginning, and when their hands accidentally touched over a floor plan on the last evening, he pulled back first. Gently, without fuss. That restraint, she realized, was its own kind of declaration. She put the note in her folio. She went to the cathedral. She did her job. But she stopped blaming the candles. The day of the ceremony. Darcy stood in the east transept with her folio and her quill and watched 400 guests file into the most beautiful room she had ever built. The foxglove arrangements caught the afternoon light exactly the way she had envisioned. The banners hung in their alternating panels of midnight and gold, the fabric rippling gently in the draft from the high windows. The candles burned in their iron holders, 300 points of light that made the stone walls glow like amber. It was, objectively, the finest work of her career. And it was supposed to be for someone else. The music shifted. The processional began. Darcy held her breath and watched the doors at the far end of the nave swing open, and Lady Elspeth Vane walked in alone, without an escort, wearing a gown of ivory silk that Darcy had helped select. She was beautiful, poised, calm. She was smiling. Not the trembling, emotional smile of a nervous bride. The steady, knowing smile of a woman who understood exactly what was about to happen and had made her peace with it. Elspeth walked the full length of the aisle. She reached the altar, and she stopped. She looked at Cormac, who was standing with his hands clasped behind his back, and his storm-blue eyes bright with something that made Darcy's chest ache. And then Elspeth turned, very slightly, and she looked directly at Darcy. The smile widened. Just a fraction. Then Elspeth stepped to the side. Not dramatically. Not with flourish. She simply moved to stand beside the officiant rather than in front of the groom, and she clasped her hands in front of her and waited. A murmur rippled through the cathedral. 400 voices, confused, alarmed, curious. Darcy's fingers tightened on her folio, and Cormac stepped down from the altar. He walked toward her. Not quickly, not slowly. With the steady, deliberate pace of a man who had made a decision and would not be moved from it. His boots echoed on the stone floor, and the candlelight caught the dark gold of his hair, and the deep blue of his coat, and the intensity in his storm-blue eyes, which were fixed on her with an expression that was not commanding, not possessive. It was open, vulnerable, terrified even. He stopped in front of her. The east transept, with its stone column and its shadows and its perfect view of the cathedral she had built for someone else. Darcy. His voice was quiet enough that only she could hear. The warmth enveloped her completely. So intense, it was almost dizzying, radiating from him in waves that made her skin flush and her breath catch. I know this isn't what you planned. Laughs, voice shaking. I planned everything in this cathedral, down to the placement of individual candles, and you are currently not standing where you are supposed to be standing. His mouth curved, just slightly. I'm standing exactly where I'm supposed to be standing. The murmuring had grown louder. She could feel 400 pairs of eyes. Her folio was trembling against her chest. I'm the wedding planner, she whispered. Not the bride. He held out his hand. Palm up. Open. An offering, not a command. You are whoever you choose to be, he said. And I am asking you to choose me. Not because of a political arrangement or a territorial alliance or anything my council negotiated. Because you are the woman who argued with me about tablecloths and stayed up until midnight adjusting seating charts and made this cathedral look like something out of a dream. And every time you are near me, I can feel it, Darcy. The warmth. Tell me you feel it too. She stared at his hand. Broad palm, long fingers. Steady, despite everything. She thought of her flat above the florist's shop. The bread and cheese by lamplight. The careful, competent life she had built around being useful to other people. A life that was safe and predictable, and entirely without this terrifying, overwhelming warmth that was currently making it difficult to breathe. She set the folio down on the stone ledge beside her. She took his hand. The warmth exploded. Not just in her chest, but everywhere, rolling through her in a wave that made her gasp, and she watched his eyes widen as he felt it too, his fingers tightening around hers as if the sensation had hit him like a physical force. The cathedral seemed to hum with it, the candlelight flickering, the very air between them charged and shimmering. She stepped forward. She took his face in her hands, and she kissed him. Not delicately, not carefully. She kissed him with 3 weeks of restraint and 6 weeks of longing, and a lifetime of believing she was the kind of woman who planned beautiful things for other people and then went home alone. She kissed him, and his hands came up to her waist and pulled her in, and the warmth between them was so intense, she could feel it humming in her bones, her blood, the spaces between her ribs. When she pulled back, his forehead rested against hers. His breathing was ragged. His storm-blue eyes were bright. "The 400 guests," she murmured against his mouth, "are staring." He laughed. A real laugh. Low and shaking. "Let them." From the altar, Lady Elspeth Vane cleared her throat. The sound carried beautifully. The acoustics were, after all, exactly as Darcy had designed them. "For the record," Elspeth said, her voice carrying across the hushed cathedral with the calm authority of a woman who had orchestrated her own role in this moment, "I endorse this entirely, and I believe the officiant is still available." A beat of silence. Then laughter, rippling through the pews like the candlelight Darcy had so carefully choreographed. She felt it move through the room, warm and startled and genuine, and she pressed her face against Cormac's shoulder and breathed. "I can't get married," she said into the fabric of his coat. "I don't have a dress." His arm tightened around her. "You planned the most beautiful ceremony I've ever seen while wearing a work dress and a quill behind your ear. I don't care what you're wearing." She pulled back, looked at him. His eyes, that impossible storm blue. His face open and unguarded in a way she had never seen from a man of his position. "Ask me properly," she said. He took both of her hands. He held them the way he held everything, carefully, deliberately, as if they mattered. "Darcy Tyndall, will you marry me? Right now, in this cathedral, in front of 400 people who were expecting a very different ceremony." "Your council is going to be furious." "My council can send a formal complaint. I'll add it to the pile." His thumbs traced circles on the backs of her hands. "Say yes." She looked at the cathedral she had built, the flowers she had chosen, the light she had designed. All of it, she realized, had been leading here. Every measurement, every decision, every late-night adjustment in the chapel garden. She had been building this room for herself. She just hadn't known it yet. Yes. The ceremony was brief. The officiant, to his credit, adapted with remarkable composure. He was an elderly man with steady hands and kind eyes who had clearly officiated enough ceremonies to know that the best ones were rarely the ones that went according to plan. The vows were not the ones Darcy had written in her planning folio. They were spoken freely, without script. Cormac's voice rough and steady and Darcy's clear, despite the trembling in her hands. He said, "I vow to listen to every plan, every argument, every correction written in red ink. I vow to show up early to every meeting for the rest of my life." She said, "I vow to stop blaming the candles." And then, quieter, so only he could hear, "I vow to stop planning my life around being invisible." She promised to argue with him about tablecloths for the rest of her life. He promised to always tell her when she was working too late, and to always bring tea when he did. She cried, and he reached up and wiped the tears from her face with his thumb, and the warmth between them settled into something deeper, not a flare, but a constant, like embers banked to last through the night. Lady Elspeth handed Darcy a bouquet of foxglove from one of the pew arrangements. "I believe the planner forgot to plan flowers for the bride," she said, and her smile was kind. Genuinely kind. Darcy took the flowers, and then she took her husband's hand. 3 months later. The morning light came through the tall windows of the private study in Havelock Keep and fell across the desk where Darcy was reviewing a territorial proposal she had drafted herself. Not a seating chart, not a floral brief. An actual policy document, because Cormac had taken one look at the way she organized a 400-person ceremony and said, "You understand logistics better than anyone on my council. Sit in." She'd sat in. She'd reorganized the council's filing system within the first week. 2 ministers had complained. 3 had thanked her. The door opened behind her, and she felt him before she heard him. that steady warmth that spread through her chest and settled in her hands, as familiar now as her own heartbeat. "You're up early," Cormac said. He set a cup of tea on her desk, brewed exactly the way she liked it, strong with a little honey, something he had figured out by the second week of their marriage and had not forgotten since. "The grain supply proposal has 3 errors in the margin calculations." She picked up the tea without looking up. "And whoever drafted the bridge renovation budget clearly has never been to the Southern Crossing, because they've underestimated the foundation work by at least 40%. He leaned against the edge of the desk. She could feel him watching her, that quiet, intent focus that still made her pulse quicken even after 3 months. "You know," he said, "I hired you to plan one ceremony. And you got a policy advisor, a logistics coordinator, and an organizational consultant." She looked up at him, storm blue eyes, the slight curve of his mouth, the warmth between them, steady and deep and constant, like sunlight through glass. "I believe that's called exceeding the brief. My council calls it terrifying. Your council needed terrifying. Their filing system was alphabetized by first name." He laughed, that low, warm sound that still caught her off guard sometimes, because 3 months ago this man had been a client and a king, and a problem she couldn't solve. And now he was the person who refilled her inkwell without being asked, and left little notes in the margins of her proposals. Not corrections. Just, "I agree," or "brilliant," or once, memorably, "You're going to make Minister Aldrin cry with this one. Good." He reached down and pulled the quill from behind her ear. She still kept one there, out of habit, and set it on the desk. Then he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. Slow and warm and thorough, and the heat bloomed through her the way it always did, the way it always would. Not a fire, but a hearth. Something built to last. "Best commission I ever made," he murmured against her mouth. She smiled, picked up her quill, went back to work. He stayed beside her, drinking his tea, reading the grain proposal she'd already corrected in red ink. Outside, the morning light moved slowly across the floor of Havelock Keep, and somewhere in the cathedral in town, 300 candles sat in their iron holders, waiting to be lit for the next ceremony. Darcy had already been asked to plan it. She'd said yes. She always said yes. But these days, she went home to a desk and a cup of tea, and a man who had learned every detail of how she took her mornings. And the word yes meant something different now. It meant, "I choose to stay."